a federal judge, left her briefcase in the back of an Uber at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. Inside it, a sealed court file marked confidential, 43 years of handwritten journals, and a letter she had been carrying for 6 months that she still hadn't decided whether to send. The driver who found it made $9.40 an hour after gas and fees. She didn't open the briefcase. She didn't take it home. She sat in a hospital parking lot at midnight, called every number she could find, and waited. Honorable Claudia Renee Ashworth had spent 22 years on the federal bench in the Northern District of Illinois. She was 61 years old, 5'4", and the kind of woman who wore her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead even when she wasn't reading anything. She had been appointed at 39, the youngest federal judge in the district at the time, and she had carried the weight of that fact like a stone in each shoe for 2 decades, never quite believing she'd earned it, never quite letting herself forget how far she'd come from the place she started. She grew up in Decatur, Illinois, in a house with 3 bedrooms and 6 people. Her father, Wendell Ashworth, worked the boiler room at a grain processing plant for 31 years and came home every night smelling like corn dust and machine oil. Her mother, Bernice, cleaned offices downtown from 5 a.m. to noon, then came home and cleaned their own house because, as she said, a woman's standards don't clock out. There was not a single lawyer in the family, not a single college graduate, just 2 people who decided their daughter would be something the world hadn't made room for yet, and who sacrificed quietly and without complaint until that something existed. Claudia got a scholarship to the University of Illinois, then a law degree from Northwestern, then a clerkship, then a public defender's office, then a U.S. attorney's appointment, then a seat on the federal bench that a senator she'd never met called historic. She remembered sitting in her car in the parking garage after the confirmation, hearing, hands shaking slightly, looking at the steering wheel and thinking, "Mama, I hope you're watching." Bernice Ashworth had died 4 years before the appointment. A stroke in the kitchen on a Wednesday morning, a glass of orange juice still on the counter. 62 years old, 23 years younger than she should have been when she died. Claudia never spoke about it publicly, but she kept a photograph of her mother in every office she'd ever occupied, always the same one. Taken at Easter Sunday service in 1989, Bernice in a pale yellow dress, laughing at something just off camera, the kind of laugh that took over her whole face and made everyone around her laugh too, even if they hadn't heard the joke. On the night of the briefcase, Claudia had been at a judicial conference dinner that ran 3 hours too long. She was tired in the way you get tired when you're 61 and have been pretending to be fully present for 6 hours straight. She'd climbed into the Uber at 11:40, typed the address of the hotel into the app, pressed her head against the window, and been unconscious before they hit the first stoplight. She woke up in the hotel lobby. The driver had gently said her name twice. She thanked him, tipped on the app, and walked inside. The briefcase stayed on the seat. She didn't notice until 12:15. She was brushing her teeth when the thought arrived, casual at first, then not casual at all. She set the toothbrush down, walked back into the bedroom, looked at the chair where she always put it, then at the door, then at the floor. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and felt the particular cold dread that comes when you realize you've lost something that cannot simply be replaced. The file inside was not supposed to leave her chambers. It was a sealed proceeding. A whistleblower case involving a defense contractor and several $100 million in alleged fraud. She had carried it home twice before, always locked in the briefcase, always careful. Tonight she had been careless, and now it was somewhere in a city of 2.7 million people in the back of a car she couldn't remember the make or model of. But that wasn't the part that kept her awake. The court file could be managed. Her clerk could handle the protocol in the morning. What kept her sitting on the edge of that bed was the journal. 43 years of handwritten entries, starting when she was 18 years old and going through last Thursday. Black composition notebooks, 6 or 7 at a time bound together with a rubber band. She brought them everywhere. She'd written in them, during law school finals, during her first appellate argument, during her mother's last week in the hospital, during every verdict she'd ever delivered that cost her sleep afterward. She had written things in those journals that she had never said aloud to another living person. Things about the cases that broke her. Things about the marriage that ended in year 11. Things about the daughter she hadn't spoken to properly in 2 years. Things about what it actually felt like, in the private hours after everyone went home, to hold that much power over other people's lives and still not be sure you were good enough for it. If those journals surfaced in the wrong hands at the wrong moment, they wouldn't end her career. Federal judges serve for life. But they would expose something she had guarded more carefully than anything the court had ever asked her to protect. The interior of a woman who had spent 4 decades building walls so precisely that even she sometimes forgot what was behind them. And then there was the letter. Single envelope, unsealed, addressed to her daughter, Simone, in Claudia's own handwriting. She had written it in January, rewritten it twice, folded it into the briefcase in February with the intention of mailing it, and then left it there for 6 months because sending it required a kind of courage that court opinions had never asked of her. The letter said things she didn't know how to say out loud. That she understood why Simone had pulled away. That the distance between them was her fault and she knew it. That she had treated her daughter's pain the way she treated everything uncomfortable, by burying it in work, in procedure, in the performance of competence, and that she was sorry in a way that no legal language she'd ever learned could adequately express. She hadn't sent it because she was afraid. Not of rejection. She was afraid that sending it might work, and she had no practice at being loved back by someone she'd already hurt. Now all of it was gone. The case file. The journals. The letter. She opened the Uber app at 12:18 and reported a lost item. She called the driver's number 3 times, no answer. She left one message, calm and clear the way she spoke in court. She gave her name. She said what she'd left behind. She said it was urgent. Then she put the phone down on the nightstand and sat with the silence. Vanessa Obi had been driving Uber since 11 o'clock that morning. It was now nearly midnight, and she had 4 more hours left in her shift before she could go home, sleep for 5 hours, and be back at the hospital by 7 for her patient care technician shift. She was 34 years old. 5'6". She had a way of holding herself, shoulders back, chin level, that made her look taller than she was, which had been useful in rooms where people tried to make her feel small, and there had been many such rooms. Her mother, Vanessa Obi, came to the United States from Enugu, Nigeria, in 2001 with a tourist visa, 2 suitcases, and Vanessa on her hip, 3 years old. They overstayed. Vanessa knew exactly what that meant. She stayed anyway, because Enugu had taken her husband to a flooding accident on a construction site, and she had decided that America would not take her daughter's future the same way. For 15 years, Vanessa worked hospital laundry. The same hospital, 3 shifts rotating, the night differential, the only reason the math worked out at all. She smelled like industrial detergent so permanently that it had become, for Vanessa, simply the smell of home. She raised her daughter in a 1-bedroom apartment in Evanston, taught her to read before kindergarten, walked her through the snow to the public library every Saturday morning, and waited while Vanessa chose her books with the seriousness of someone making a legal decision. Vanessa had made it to nursing school at the University of Illinois at Chicago. She was 3 semesters in, Dean's List, when Vanessa's blood pressure brought her to the ER on a January morning. By afternoon, they had the real diagnosis: Stage 2 congestive heart failure. The years of double shifts and missed checkups, and one small apartment that was never quite warm enough in winter, had done their quiet damage. Vanessa took a medical leave from nursing school, moved back in, got the PCT job at the hospital, close enough to watch her mother's care, enough hours to pay rent, not enough of either to do both without burning something down. She'd been driving Uber for 8 months now to fill the gap. 3 nights a week, midnight shifts, because those were the only hours she wasn't already spoken for. She was still going back to nursing school. She had a plan. She could outline it in her sleep, because she often did. Finish the prerequisite hours, return part-time, finish in 18 months, pass the NCLEX, move from PCT to RN, actually afford the kind of care her mother needed. She kept the plan updated in a notes app on her phone. She reviewed it on slow nights, parked between rides, not as wishful thinking, but as a set of instructions. As the only map she trusted, she was parked outside the hospital. Not her mother's hospital, a different one across town, where she'd just dropped a ride when she noticed the briefcase in her back seat. It was heavy, black leather, the kind that had a combination lock on the clasp, professional, expensive in the specific way that professional things are expensive. Not showy, just made to last by someone who expected things to last. She picked it up and set it on the passenger seat. Unlocked it wasn't, but the latches weren't fully seated. She could feel the weight of something dense inside, papers, and something that shifted slightly, something bound together. She didn't open it. That might seem like a small thing. It wasn't. Vanessa sat in that parking lot at midnight with a locked briefcase on the seat beside her and every reason to leave it at a lost and found and go home. Instead, she opened the Uber app and found the trip information. She called the passenger's number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. A woman's voice. Controlled. The kind of voice that was used to being listened to. She left a message saying she'd found a briefcase and was trying to return it. She called again at 12:25, again at 12:40. On the third call, the woman answered. Claudia's voice on the phone was measured, but Vanessa could hear something underneath it, something careful being held very still. She told Vanessa what was inside, not all of it, just enough. A sealed legal file, important journals, a personal letter. "Where are you?" Claudia asked. Vanessa told her. 40 minutes from the hotel on a good night. Later than that now, with less traffic but also fewer lights. "I can come to you," Claudia said. "No," Vanessa said. "Stay where you are. I'll bring it." There was a pause on the other end. Not a long one. "I'll pay for your time," Claudia said. "I'll bring it because it's yours," Vanessa said. "We can talk about the rest later." She pulled out of the hospital parking lot at 12:51. The GPS said 42 minutes. Her car, a 2007 Hyundai Sonata with 204,000 miles and a serpentine belt that her mechanic had flagged 3 months ago, took the on-ramp to the expressway without complaint. The belt held. The engine didn't argue. Vanessa drove in the left lane with the briefcase on the passenger seat beside her, upright, latched, exactly as she'd found it. She thought about what might be inside, not because she wanted it. She had no use for sealed court files and no interest in someone else's private writing. But she thought about the weight of it. The particular weight of things that belong to someone else that you are carrying carefully through the dark. She had some experience with that kind of weight. She carried her mother's medical history in her memory the way other people carried grocery lists. She carried the names and dosages and contraindications and the specific look her mother got when the shortness of breath was coming on before her mother herself always noticed. She carried the nursing school plan in a notes app she updated every week. She had been carrying things carefully through the dark for a long time. The drive took 38 minutes. She pulled into the hotel loop at 1:29 a.m. Claudia was waiting in the lobby. She was still in her conference clothes, dark blazer, reading glasses on her forehead, and she stood up the moment Vanessa came through the door. She looked at the briefcase first, then at Vanessa. "Thank you," she said. She reached for it with both hands, the way you reach for something you were not sure you'd see again. Vanessa held it out. "Everything's exactly as I found it. I didn't open it." Claudia took it, set it on the table beside the lobby chair, and opened the latch. She checked the file, the journals. Then she reached into the inner pocket. The envelope was still there. She pressed one finger against the corner of it and let out a slow breath that she'd probably been holding since 12:15. "How much do I owe you?" she asked. She was already reaching for her purse. "For your time, the gas, tell me what's fair." Vanessa shook her head. "I didn't drive here for payment." Claudia stopped. "The drive is 40 minutes each way. It's almost 2 in the morning. I know what time it is, Judge Ashworth. Vanessa said it quietly. Not to invoke authority, just to make clear she'd heard the voicemail. My mother taught me that when you find something that belongs to someone else, you return it, not because it costs you something, because it costs you more not to. Claudia's hand went still on the clasp of her purse. She looked at Vanessa the way people look at sentences that don't fit the paragraph they expected. Nobody drives 40 minutes at 1 in the morning just to do the right thing, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It sounded more like a question she was asking herself. I just did, Vanessa said, and then she picked up her keys and walked back toward the door. Wait. Claudia's voice stopped her at the edge of the lobby. What's your name? Vanessa turned. Vanessa Obi. Can I ask you something, Vanessa? You can ask. Claudia looked at her for a moment, the reading glasses still on her forehead. Something in her expression had shifted. Not the judge's face, something underneath it. What do you do when you're not driving? Vanessa paused. Not because the question surprised her, but because she was deciding how much of the answer to give. I'm a patient care technician at Mercy West, she said. I'm also in the middle of getting back to nursing school. Getting back to? I left when my mother got sick. She has congestive heart failure. I moved home, took the hospital job, started driving nights to fill the gap. I've got a plan to go back. She said it simply, the way she said everything. Not performing it, not softening it, just placing it in front of the other person as fact. I'm going back. Claudia said nothing for a moment. Then, how long has she been sick? 14 months. Who's with her tonight? The question landed differently than the others. Personal. Almost tender. She knows how to call me, Vanessa said. She's got a neighbor who checks in. She's okay tonight. She glanced toward the door. She's always worried I don't sleep enough. She'd be pretty unhappy if she knew I was standing in a hotel lobby at 1:30 talking to a stranger. Claudia almost smiled. Almost. Go home, she said. Please, and thank you. I mean that. Vanessa nodded. Walked out. Her car started on the first try. The serpentine belt held. She drove north through the empty city with the radio on low, a late-night gospel station that faded in and out depending on the block. She was home and in bed by 2:47. She had to be up at 6:15. Claudia sat in the hotel lobby for a long time after she left. The briefcase on the table, the file intact, the journals intact, the letter, still unsealed, still inside. She took it out and held it. She'd been carrying it for 6 months. She'd been carrying the silence behind it for 2 years. She thought about a 34-year-old woman driving 40 minutes through the middle of the night, alone with a stranger's case on the passenger seat, not because anyone would know. Not because anyone was watching, but because her mother had taught her what things cost and what they were worth. Claudia's mother had done the same thing. Office cleaning, 5 a.m., starts. A voice that said, a woman's standards don't clock out. She had died at 62 with a glass of orange juice still on the counter. She never saw the robe, never sat in the gallery on the first day, never heard the clerk call the room to order for the first time and add the words "the Honorable" before a name that had started in a 3-bedroom house in Decatur with 6 people and no lawyers. Claudia pressed her thumb against the corner of the envelope. She thought about what Vanessa Obi had said. It costs you more not to. She sat there in the lobby with the letter in her hands for a long time. And then she did what she had been too careful to do for 6 months. She took out her phone and called her daughter. It rang 5 times. Of course it did. It was 1:50 in the morning. Simone's voicemail. Her daughter's voice, short and careful. The same way she'd been speaking to Claudia for 2 years. The same way you spoke to someone when you'd stopped expecting them to change. Claudia waited for the tone. It's Mom, she said, and then she stopped platforming. She stopped being the voice that courts stood for. She just said what was true. I know it's late. I know you probably won't listen to this until tomorrow, but I needed to say it now, before I talked myself back out of it. She paused. I'm sorry. Not the kind of sorry that explains itself or justifies itself or makes it sound like I had reasons that outweigh the damage. Just, I'm sorry. I know I put the work in front of you. I know I made you feel like the verdict was always more important than the phone call. I know the distance between us has my fingerprints all over it." Her voice held, but only just. "Tonight someone drove 40 minutes in the middle of the night to return something I'd lost, and she did it because her mother taught her what things are worth. I have been sitting here trying to figure out what I'm waiting for." She exhaled. "Call me when you're ready. I'll pick up. I'll always pick up." She hung up. She didn't put the letter back in the briefcase. She found a hotel envelope at the front desk, borrowed a pen from the night clerk, and addressed it properly this time. She paid the clerk to drop it in the outgoing mail first thing in the morning. Then she went to bed. For the first time in months, she slept. 3 days later, Claudia was back in Chicago, back in her chambers. Her clerk, a meticulous first-year named Elliot, had noticed nothing wrong with the case file. The journals were back on her home bookshelf where they belonged. The briefcase sat by the coat rack and had not moved. She had thought about Vanessa Obi 4 times since the hotel lobby. Not in a sentimental way. Claudia's mind didn't work sentimentally. She thought about her the way she thought about cases that didn't resolve cleanly. Something kept returning. She called a friend who knew the nursing school landscape in Chicago. She called another friend who ran a healthcare workforce foundation she'd spoken at twice. Then she sat at her desk for 20 minutes and thought carefully about the difference between charity and investment, between helping someone and presuming they needed to be helped. She found Vanessa through the Uber app feedback system, which required 3 calls and more patience than she typically extended to bureaucratic processes. She left a message asking if they could speak. Vanessa called back the same evening, on her break between the hospital shift and her first ride of the night. Claudia didn't announce what she was offering. She asked questions first, about the nursing program, the timeline, the costs. Vanessa answered them the same way she answered everything. Clearly, precisely, without softening or embellishing. The numbers were not complicated. The program required 14 months of part-time coursework. The fees were $11,200 in total. The NCLEX preparation cost another $400. Between the hospital job and the Uber shifts, Vanessa was bringing in roughly $3,100 a month, of which $890 went to rent, $420 to her mother's prescriptions and copays, $180 to her own loan payment from the first nursing school attempt, and the rest to food, gas, and the serpentine belt that was eventually going to require attention. She had saved $1,700 over 8 months. At that rate, nursing school was roughly 4 years away. She would be 38. "Tell me what you actually need," Claudia said. "Not what you think I'll agree to, what you actually need." There was a pause. The kind that happens when someone isn't used to being asked that question sincerely. "I need someone to cover the program fees," Vanessa said. "Not as a loan. As an investment in something that's going to happen anyway. Just faster. I need my mother's prescriptions covered so I can stop choosing between that and the belt that's going to strand me on the highway. And I need to not be driving 3 nights a week anymore, because I'm making decisions at work on 5 hours of sleep and in my field that is not a theoretical problem." Claudia wrote it down. "All of it." "I have one condition," Claudia said. Vanessa waited. "You have to tell me when it isn't working, not when it fails. Before that, if something comes up, if the plan changes, if you need something adjusted, you call me. I've spent 22 years on the federal bench watching people fail to ask for help until it was too late to give it. I don't want to watch that happen here." Another pause, shorter this time. "I can do that," Vanessa said. "Good." Claudia paused. "And Vanessa, I'm not doing this because I owe you. You made clear you weren't asking to be owed. I'm doing this because 40 years ago someone could have done it for me, and they didn't. I made it anyway, but it took twice as long and cost twice as much, and there were years where I came very close to not making it at all. I don't want that story to be yours." The line was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" Vanessa said. "Yes. The letter in the briefcase. Did you send it?" Claudia looked at the window. The lake was visible from her chambers on clear days. Today was clear. "I mailed it," she said. "That same night." "Did she write back?" A small silence. She called. Last Sunday, we talked for 2 hours. Claudia's voice shifted almost imperceptibly. Not softer, exactly, more honest. It was the first real conversation we'd had in 2 years. Vanessa said nothing for a moment. Then, quietly, I'm glad. She started the nursing program in September. Claudia covered the fees in full and connected her with the Healthcare Workforce Foundation, which covered supplemental costs Claudia hadn't thought to ask about. Textbooks, clinical supplies, the licensure exam itself. The driving stopped. The hospital shifts stayed because Vanessa wanted them. She was learning things in that PCT role that the classroom hadn't given her yet. Her mother, a DA's, saw a cardiologist who specialized in heart failure management for the first time in 14 months without the appointment needing to be balanced against anything else. She cried on the way home, not from sadness, from the specific relief of something difficult becoming less difficult, which in its own way can break you open. Vanessa called Claudia twice that first month, not with problems, with updates. The kind of updates that mean someone is paying attention and doesn't want the person who bet on them to wonder. Claudia appreciated it more than she said. In November, Claudia sat in on a hearing that ran 6 hours and left her hollowed out in the way that certain kinds of testimony does. A fraud case, financial crimes, ordinary people's savings accounts made into instruments by people who understood exactly how trust worked and decided to use that understanding against the people who extended it. She drove home alone, like she always did, thought about Vanessa Obi, who had a stranger's briefcase in her car at midnight and called 3 times before anyone answered. She thought about the difference between the people in that courtroom and the person in that parking lot, and she thought it was not a difference of intelligence or opportunity or even character fully formed. It was a difference of what someone had been taught, early and consistently, about what things cost and what they were worth. She called Simone that night, just to say hello. Simone answered on the second ring. They talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular. Simone's job, a trip she was planning, a book she'd read that she thought her mother would like. At the end of the call, Simone said, "I got the letter, Mom. I've read it a lot." A pause. "It sounded like you." "It was me," Claudia said. Finally, Simone laughed, the kind of laugh that meant she was still careful, still moving slowly toward the open door, but moving. That was enough. For now, it was enough. 16 months after September, Vanessa sat at her kitchen table at 7:15 in the morning with her laptop open and a cup of coffee going cold beside the keyboard. She refreshed the state licensing board's portal for the 5th time. The result had been there since 6:40. She'd read it 3 times. Pass. She sat still for a full minute. The apartment was quiet. Her mother was in the bedroom, still asleep. The city was audible through the window. Trucks, a distant siren, someone's radio from a window above. Ordinary morning sounds, everything exactly as it had been. Except it wasn't. She called her mother first. Mama. The sound that came through the phone was not a word. It was the thing beneath words, the deep particular sound of a woman who had crossed an ocean and worked hospital laundry and raised a daughter in rooms that were too small and winters that were too cold because she believed completely in something she could not yet prove. The belief had been right. The proof was now. Then she called Claudia. Claudia picked up on the first ring. "I passed," Vanessa said. 3 seconds of silence. 3 full seconds in which neither woman spoke, and the line held between them like something precious being held up to the light. "I know," Claudia said. "I knew it the night you drove 40 minutes through the dark to return a briefcase you could have left on the seat." Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "It did change things," she said finally. "The briefcase, just not the way you'd think." Claudia understood that. She did. The following month, Claudia began her first day of retirement. Not full retirement. She took senior status, which meant she could still hear cases at her choosing, which she would, because 22 years had taught her that she could not be idle in the face of things that needed deciding. But the pace changed. The schedule opened. The dining table in her apartment, which had held one place setting for longer than she liked to admit, began to see company. Simone came for Thanksgiving. First time in 3 years. She stood in the kitchen doorway watching her mother do something ordinary, standing at the counter cutting bread, and she looked at her the way children look at parents when they've been away long enough to see them clearly again, like a person, not a force of nature. They ate at the table together with the reading glasses still on Claudia's forehead, and the photograph of Bernice Ashworth on the bookshelf across the room. A woman in a pale yellow Easter dress, laughing at something just off camera, taking up her full share of space in the frame. In January, Vanessa Obi started her first shift as a registered nurse. She wore her scrubs and her badge, and she stood outside the unit door for a moment before she went in. Not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to note it, to hold the moment up and look at it before she walked through it, and it became the ordinary texture of her days. She thought about her mother, whose lungs were clearer now than they'd been in 2 years. She thought about the parking lot outside the hospital, where she'd sat at midnight with a stranger's briefcase on the seat beside her, calling 3 times before anyone answered. She thought about the judge in the hotel lobby, holding an envelope she'd been carrying for 6 months, the reading glasses on her forehead, the look on her face when she understood what was inside. She thought about how none of it was planned, how the whole thread of it, her mother's illness, nursing school, the Uber shifts, the briefcase, the parking lot, the 40-minute drive, the lobby, the phone call, the letter, Simone's Thanksgiving. This door had run through the single unexamined decision she'd made at midnight in a hospital parking lot, to call 3 times before she gave up, to wait until someone answered, to drive through the dark with something that wasn't hers and return it intact. Her mother had told her once when she was small and asking why they did things the careful way when the easy way was right there. Because God is counting, and your character is the only thing that compounds without limit. Vanessa pulled the unit door open and walked in. The badge caught the light. A patient at the end of the hall looked up from her bed and watched her come, and the look was the specific look of someone who has been waiting for someone patient enough to listen carefully and is relieved to see them arrive. Vanessa went to her first,